Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you are thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a couple of opportunities that we are currently searching for. In Dallas, a corporate attorney, transactional attorney at a mid-size firm, about 60 to 70 lawyers, pays very, very well. And if you've got 2 or 3 years of significant experience in corporate, in real estate, in finance, that's the type of candidate that they are looking for. So if that's you or someone you know, would love to hear from you. So get in touch with me about that one. The other one I want to mention specifically is in Houston, and this is for a high-end litigation and trial boutique. These are former big law people. They've had their own firm now that is growing, and they've had it for almost a decade. Lots of great experience for whoever takes this role, taking the lead on briefs and motions and even depots and hearings. And so if you're in kind of that 2 to 5 year experience range, that's the sweet spot for this one. It's going to be high-end work. It's going to be high-end pay as well. So you will get well compensated here as well. And then the last one I'll mention, combo, I suppose, because I'm searching for 2 separate estate planning positions. One happens to be in Austin and one happens to be in Houston. So if you have any interest in either moving into estate planning, maybe from corporate or something like that, that would work for either of these. Or if you are someone who's doing estate planning in a firm right now, wanting to make a transition to somewhere else, that would be also an opportunity for you here. So you can email me, daniel@varsitysearch.com, and would love to connect with you about those. All right, today we are in Houston, where our guest is Derek Hollingsworth. And Derek is a 7-time Texas super lawyer and a member of the National Trial Lawyers Top 100. He's a founding partner at Drumheller, Hollingsworth, and Monty, where he tries cases on both the civil and criminal sides of the docket. Does a lot of white-collar work. Derek got his start at a large Houston law firm before spending 16 years as an attorney and then partner at Rusty Hardin Associates, where he represented a number of high-profile clients in high-profile cases. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Derek Hollingsworth on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Derek Hollingsworth joins us right now. Derek, thanks so much for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here, Daniel. Thanks, and appreciate you inviting me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. It's good to catch up and see you again. And I know that you've been busy getting your new firm established and off the ground here these last couple of years, and I'm sure that's been interesting, especially this year. So, well, I'm excited to hear about it. Why don't you just tell us about your firm? Like I said, I mean, it's we're new here as of about a year ago, and you're not too far before that. So I'm anxious to hear about it. So tell us what about your firm and how things have been going these first couple of years.
Yeah, no, thanks. We started our firm, like you said, 2 years ago. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary. We were a breakoff of another kind of small firm called Rusty Hardin Associates. Rusty's was a great guy that I worked with and was partners with. Worked there for 15 years. Left on great terms with 2 of my other partners, and we formed Drumheller, Hollingsworth, and Monty. And because we all have multi-syllabic last names, we just call it DHM Law.
There you go.
It's about a better way to deal with it, because otherwise, if someone had to answer our phone and say all 3 of our names, 30 times a day, they may go crazy.
Yeah, that's right.
So no, things have been going great. It was really exciting. Our firm, I think, as you and I've discussed in some points in the past, we have a mix of civil litigation and criminal defense. So everything is a trial related or litigation related practice. We don't do transactional work. We don't do family law work. But we handle a lot of other types of cases. It's for a small 3-person shop. It's a real interesting mix of criminal defense on a high level, civil litigation kind of all across the board, commercial and both and personal injury to some degree, not a high volume of that, but we have some of those cases as well. So it's been an interesting way to start. This year's obviously been a challenge, but we've gotten through it, and I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I want to ask you more about the criminal defense side, because I think there are a lot of law students and then young lawyers who have big ideas about wanting to do criminal defense, and I think it's a hard area to break into in a lot of ways compared to some of the others, because there are most big firms don't do it, or a lot of the work, especially at the level that you're doing it, is concentrated within certain firms, and it's just there's not a lot of opportunities necessarily for young lawyers to break into it. And so I'm curious as to if there are people listening, kind of thinking about I'd like to get into that kind of work. What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, no, great question. So I did not go to law school or even graduate law school with the idea that I was going to ever practice criminal law. I'm always impressed by people who discover that in law school, and I had some friends that I'm still close with that definitely wanted to practice criminal law in law school and still do. I kind of came into it backwards. I really came into criminal law because I started off at a big law firm doing commercial litigation, and I didn't hate it. But I was a little concerned that because of the types of clients and the size of the cases, that it would be very difficult to actually get into trial.
Yeah.
So I decided to go to a DA's office as a young lawyer. I quit my big firm job. I gave up, good salary. Took a pay cut. My wife gave me the double glance out of the side eye, kind of, what the heck are you thinking? But
I've seen that look.
Yeah, I'm sure I think we all have. So I took a leap and went to the DA's office, and it was really less about criminal law, though I really was interested in criminal law because it's such a fascinating area, but it was less about criminal law and more about trial experience.
Right.
But I found a real love and I think aptitude for it. So when I left, I left the DA's office and joined Rusty Hardin Associates. He always had a really nice mix of criminal defense and civil litigation. And it was kind of my perfect mix because I really do enjoy both. And that's kind of the way I went into it. I do know a lot of people. I think if you're interested, kind of to get to your question, I think if you're interested and you know it in law school that you want to do criminal work, there are certainly classes you can take, and there are certain programs that law schools offer where you can go get your temporary bar card and represent indigent defendants. You can try to do internships at DA's offices. But candidly, the only way I think that you're ever going to be a legitimate, experienced criminal defense lawyer from a young age is by going to a DA's office first. Again, I kind of went there by happenstance. But I think if I've told as many people as will listen, that's really the only way to do it. Don't get me wrong. There are highly qualified criminal defense lawyers in Houston and elsewhere that never spent 1 second in a DA's office, and they wear it like a badge of honor. I mean, they're great at what they do, but I think it took longer. I think they typically worked for well-known criminal defense lawyers and kind of apprenticed for them. So it's almost that was their version of the DA's office.
Yeah.
But I think if that's what you're interested in, I think the best path is to try to find a DA's office.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen, more recently, I was talking to someone, just the other day that had done this, where their firm had allowed them to basically kind of take a little, I don't know if it was actually leave, but spend some time in a DA's office to get trial experience, sort of on loan, basically kind of deal. And so I have seen lawyers take advantage of those programs to the extent their current firm will allow them to do that, just to get that experience, because it's a recognition that on the civil side, that those young lawyers are not going to get that experience for quite a while. And that's the only place they can do it, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was one of the first participants in the Lawyer on Loan program in Dallas. That's how I first got involved. Yeah. Was the current DA in Dallas at the time. I was at a firm in Dallas, big firm, and the DA started that program in Dallas. And the DA at the time was a former partner at a big commercial firm. And so he knew, hey, I'm chocolate, you're peanut butter. He just put them together, and he would call his big firm friends and colleagues and say, now that I'm the elected DA, why don't you send some of your aspiring young lawyers over to us, and you keep paying them, by the way.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. And we'll have free labor. So, and I did that, and that's what kind of gave me the taste of wanting to do it. And then I had that really fun conversation. I joke, but it was a fun conversation with my wife about, well, I think I'm actually going to leave this big firm job and do this, full time. So.
Wow. Well, that's neat. And I think a lot of opportunities in different ways people can go about this, but that's helpful to hear some of those. The DA's office being key in really any of those routes, though, in some way, shape, or form. I also want to ask you about how COVID has been impacting your firm and your practice here this year. We're talking today on December 17th. So by the time people are listening to this, just for context, things may have changed. We're on the front edge of vaccines coming out. And so all of that, maybe that will help kind of spur us along to get past this. But what has been the impact on the way that you practice and the way that your law firm's been operating? And then I want to ask about clients and work as well.
Yeah, no, all great and interesting, fertile areas, and I think that will still probably exist when this airs in January.
Sure.
So from a business, sort of the business of running a firm situation, COVID really hit the brakes, I guess, not the stop button, but the brakes on all of our work. So anyone who has handled, a case knows that it sort of has a life cycle. It's got a beginning, it's kind of got a middle, it's got an end. And a lot of cases, whether they be criminal or civil, are driven by pressure points. And typically pressure points have to do with trials. And, if someone believes that they're about to go to trial and lose, then that typically motivates them to do things. And so what I noticed as a whole, it was happening everywhere, but we certainly experienced it. It just felt like none of our cases were moving. So if it was a criminal case, you couldn't get a trial. There was very little incentive to move things along that quickly. You weren't going to court. Things were getting reset. And so I have cases now that are, I have basically an inventory of criminal cases that are really old. And nothing's happening on them, and they'll probably start to pick back up in the spring. Right. If we start getting a vaccine and start trying to get some trials going, but that's really the only thing that's going to drive them are the trials. So I think overall, I've noticed a real slowdown over the last year, for civil and criminal cases. And I've talked to colleagues of mine who have had the exact same experience, as an overall slow up. There's a backlog, for example, of trials in the civil and criminal justice system. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of cases that are just backlogged. Because again, the trial is the only, thing that can break the dam. Not that you can't resolve cases without a trial. And as we both know, most of them do. Right. But they often resolve because you're getting close to a trial.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. I think that's been a huge, issue. And of course, if things slow down, if you're in the business of running a law firm, then your cash flow can slow down. You're to the extent like us, we're a small firm. Pre-COVID, we were thinking about expanding. We were having those kinds of conversations. I bet a lot of firms were. Yeah. We were actually pretty thankful, just among ourselves to say, I'm really glad that we didn't expand, because it was nice to have a little bit smaller footprint anytime you go through something like that. But on the flip side of that, I think that things are going to loosen up in the next year because I do think the vaccine's going to come out. I think we're going to get more back to normal. It'll take a little while. But and anytime you have a backlog, the first thing you're going to do is just everybody's going to say, we got to get this backlog cleared up. We got to get this backlog cleared up, and that's going to require lawyers, and it's going to require speed and work. And I think it's going to really help the entire situation.
Yeah. And I should probably know this, but are there cases that are filed or working through right now as to the constitutionality of, on the criminal side, speedy trials and such, in terms of that? I imagine that there's some point at which that those types of considerations come in. I'm sure there's leeway and grace for some aspects of it now, but like some of these other cases we've seen in other contexts, the courts are willing to give latitude to local officials for so long, and before the constitutional principles sort of come back into play and balance. Have you seen any of that, or anything like that that's been percolating lately?
So I would say interesting. It's a little different than what you're asking, but what I have seen is a fair number of lawyers who have clients in custody, so in jail or in prison. Let's talk about prison for a minute, right? So people in prison, if we're just using the defense criminal vernacular, typically we think of prison as someone, once they're convicted, they go to prison. While they're waiting trial, they're in jail. Those are so. A fair number of colleagues of mine have been filing what they call compassionate release motions for their clients who maybe pled guilty to a crime or had a trial and were convicted of a crime, to see if they could be compassionately released from jail. And they've had some success because they can cite COVID numbers in the prisons and say, this just isn't the right place for this person to be. So that's one thing. I know that's different than a speedy trial question you asked. But that's one interesting area that's really been going.
We've seen those COVID reports in the jails and in the prisons, are in Texas especially, have been a huge story. Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is, the Speedy Trial Act is an interesting beast, and it's real different between federal law and state law. By statute and federal law, the Speedy Trial Act is locked down. I mean, this is once you're indicted, this is how many days you have until you have a trial, and there are very few exceptions to the rule. And so I think that is being, tested often by the coronavirus issues, because it's so black and white. Right. State court, it's very loosey-goosey. It is just, you have a right to a speedy trial, but, what does that really mean? And what I think but my prediction is what I think we're all going to see, is that in the coming year, whenever you don't have quite the excuse you do now for just, we can't have trials, we just can't have trials. I think once that door opens, that Pandora's box opens a little bit, you're going to have people saying, everybody's going to want a trial. And then people are going to say, well, I can't get one because, and my guy's in custody. And so there's a speedy trial violation. And I think that, in my opinion, is when things are really going to come to a head. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, last question about COVID. Have you, what have you learned over this year about how to practice virtually, remotely, using the different tools and technologies that you maybe didn't know at the start of the year, and that will be helpful for you going forward?
Well, I think it's no secret that Zoom or other video conferencing systems have just exploded during this time. They've obviously exploded in all kinds of industries, but they have likewise taken off in the practice of law. Many of the things, the hearings, the procedures that I would have engaged in pre-COVID in person, I would say 95+% of those are happening by Zoom now. Some of that's nice because when you do criminal work, it is not uncommon to have to go to court for a very mundane reason that has no real value, especially in state court. The state court judges like for defendants on bond to show up and have to have a court setting, and it's silly. So Zoom has really helped that because now you can have these court settings with a client, one place and you in another, and nobody has to go down, and they can, maybe even be at work and just go into a private room and make their really quick court setting. So that's been kind of a mixed blessing, honestly. But I did want to share with you, my law partner just handled an entire contested arbitration over Zoom. With witnesses, obviously with an arbitrator, not exactly like a jury trial, but it's close.
Yeah.
And he was sharing with me a very interesting phenomenon because you had many people in many different places. So you had lots of devices, lots of computers or cameras, lots of, quote, boxes to watch, like on a Zoom box or whatever you want to say, right? On your Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using.
Yeah.
And he said it was really, really difficult because not only are you, as the lawyer, having to do your trial thing, you question a witness, cross a witness, whatever, but he also had to keep an eye on the other boxes of participants because he said what happened is at one point, and his arbitration was confidential. They had a strict rule, only one person in a room unless you identify the person. So in other words, if you had someone off camera, that might be okay, but you had to say, hey, so-and-so's off camera. Well, he was questioning a witness, and he noticed one of the boxes that wasn't being questioned. I know you and I can see each other right now, but the podcast audience won't be able to, but put his hand over his mouth. If you can kind of imagine the way maybe in a Major League Baseball game, when the catcher and the pitcher talk on the mound.
The mid over the...
So he saw that happening, and with a guy who wasn't supposed to have anybody else in the room. So he actually interrupted, my law partner interrupted and said, Judge, or to the arbitrator, sir, I see this going on. And they caught the guy with another person in the room. And it was, I don't know, I wouldn't have thought of that. But for you asking this question and him telling me about this story. But I thought that was interesting too, because think about, you wouldn't even have the opportunity for that to happen if you're all just in a room together.
Right. That's so wild. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no. And then of course, someone at some point is going to write a book about all the crazy, what that happened on the Zoom call where someone thought the video wasn't on in the hearing and they went to the restroom or they, stood up and they didn't have they had pajamas on the bottom or whatever. I mean, that stuff is floating all over, the ethersphere. But
yeah, absolutely. Derek, I want you to think back to when you first were in practice and first kind of got started, and what's maybe something that you learned or picked up from maybe an older lawyer or a colleague or something then that has stuck with you and has really become something that's important in your practice even today?
Yeah, I think a few things, but I think the biggest, if I had to put them all together, I'd say don't be afraid to take chances. I look back on my law school experience, which was very positive, and I academically did very well, and I sort of flowed into what a lot of people who did well. I went to a big law firm, and I felt really good about it, and but when I decided to leave that firm and go to a DA's office, that was a real risk, and I had a mixed bag of reactions from people. Some people thought I was crazy, but there were some of the partners in my firm, when I told them, who really, closed the door and said, I'm really proud of you for doing this. I was in my late 20s, or 27, 20. So, and they said, look, you aren't going to be able to do this later in life. You will get used to the money. You'll have children. You'll be saving for college. You'll be, you'll just have you'll have worries, money worries. Yeah. And if you'll go do this now, this is great. And so I've always appreciated those lawyers or those partners who, patted me on the back and said, this is a good risk for you, even though we're sad to see you go. It's a good risk. And I think that, that's important because when we go to law school, we think, I'm going to law school, I want to be a lawyer, but a lot of people don't know what that's about. Right. And you don't know what you're going to like. And so I think you kind of have to look. You're not going to want to move around firm to firm or profession to profession every 2 months. You're going to eventually run out of chances.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think you've got to be nimble and take chances because, you'll never know. And I look at that one as it was a risk that was worth taking. It really paid off. And it was a pretty big deal for me both then and now looking back. So I would say that was a really, just don't be scared to take chances. Don't be scared to say, I'm going to go try this place out and see what it's like. Give it a good try. I stayed at my first firm for 2 years. Even after I did that lawyer-owned loan, I came back. I said, I really like this DA office stuff, but I'm going to come back and I just really want to see. And that way I stayed for a couple of years. I know that's not forever. But and then I left and I've I don't know. I would encourage people to always be flexible in their own minds. Try it out. Be a good worker. I mean, don't move around all the time, but be ready to take some risks.
Yeah, I think that's great and encouraging for people to hear, because I do think that there are people right now that are in, and a lot of times it is in large firms, but wherever they might be, where it may not appear to be the right fit long term for them, but they do for whatever reason. If it's the big firm, maybe it's the money, or if it's other places, maybe it's because of a relationship there or whatever. But that they feel tied down or feel like they can't leave or try something else, or it's too big a risk, like you're saying, to jump out and do something, especially if it's taking less money or changing course completely to a different practice area or something like that. So I appreciate you saying that, because I do think people need to hear those kinds of stories and that kind of encouragement. It's not right for everybody to make those changes and take those risks, but I think a lot of times people don't do that out of just fear and other things that are not, really actual reasons not to do it. And most people, are very happy that they did, and some may even wind up going back later, but at least then
Yeah,
right?
No, it's okay. I think if you're honest and upfront with people.
Yeah.
And candidly, I was like that when I was with Rusty. I really enjoyed working with Rusty, but for probably about 5 years, I really longed to go do my own thing, and I didn't. I waited, and it wasn't. And part of it is a real testament to the firm he created. I enjoyed it so much that I didn't follow my dream. I don't mean it like it was. And so, but now that I have, I've never been happier, and I'm really glad I did. So. Anyway, it's just another example of, if you've got something that's just yearning at you, and you deserve to be happy. And you don't know 100% what's going to make you happy until you try it. And you may try it and you love it. You may try it and you don't, but you won't know it until you try it.
Exactly. And I just think about those partners closing those doors and telling you, you got to think a lot of them, if they didn't say it outright, are probably thinking, I wish I had done that when I was your age.
Yeah.
I might have come back to this chair, but I wish I would have done that when I was 27, and I can't now. I'm 50 and I've got kids in college and whatever.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt about it. They were either some of them said it outright. Some of them, it was clear they were living vicariously.
Right. So when you're observing associates in your firm, and whether it's your current firm or when you're at Rusty Hardin's firm as well, what's something that stands out among young lawyers, young associates that really makes a positive impression on you?
I think that an associate who is willing to own an issue or own a case or an assignment is an incredibly valuable asset. I think that it's understandable when you're new to be insecure. It's understandable to feel like I'm going to build this little fence around me, and I'm going to handle what's inside the little fence, and I'm not going to go outside the little fence because that's how I feel most secure. And that's a totally understandable human reaction. But I think as a young associate, you really want to fight against that. You're just not going to knock those fences down, because a lot of us have them, and it makes sense. I'm sure I was like that too. But I really value working with young lawyers who will own an issue, not just hey, you asked me to do X, I did X, here you go. I mean, is that helpful? Of course, I asked him to do X. But, to say X is what I'm asking you to do, but X is part of a case. And the lawyer that says, I want to know about this case, and I've got some ideas about this case, and, that says, hey, you've given me X, but what do you think if I did Y and Z as well? That to me is what makes the difference between a average, person who works with you, an average young associate, and an extraordinary one, is that ability to grab and own an issue. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's one that we hear fairly often here, honestly, and I think it's one that just doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't get communicated, or it's certainly not intuitive, I think, to young lawyers who are, at least, maybe for whatever reason, sort of more trained to just respond to the authority and turn to the assignment and just kind of give back what was given and just back and forth, kind of in that transactional type of way. And it seems like in a lot of ways, it's the first time that anyone's, given them something that the question is really, don't just answer this question, but think about what other questions might arise from your answer to the question, and go through that process, and what might then, the next step be if we're going to go down this road, and let's get that ready, and all those types of things. But it doesn't seem to come naturally, and so it's funny how often we talk about this. I don't know why that is necessarily, but that seems like it's an issue that is ongoing with most associates.
I think it's a natural human reaction. I think that it's normal to be a little insecure. It's normal. It's a new job. You want to impress people. So you want to say, well, I want to do this one thing really well,
right,
rather than, step into some pile of, that I may mess up. And I think that's a very normal reaction. That's why I think as hopefully as, someone who's supervising younger lawyers, you need to have patience. Yeah. But as someone who's being supervised, you also have to understand the person who's supervising you really wants you to try to step out. Yeah. They don't want you to be the bird in the nest that the mom brings the worm to every day. They also want you to try to fly, knowing that sometimes it's going to not work 100%, but give it a shot. At least be intellectually curious, at least be enthusiastic, at least come back and say, I did this. Is there anything else I can do? Can you tell me anything else about this case? I'm really interested in this case. I know you asked me just to go research the statute of limitations on this type of claim, but, I was really thinking through how the discovery rule might apply. And I was really kind of wondering if this is something, do we do this in a summary judgment setting, or do we have to go do depositions to uncover this? And, if we do depositions, do you want me to kind of write you like an outline or some thoughts about that? Or, if this is a summary judgment issue, do you want me to kind of try to start writing that section of the summary judgment just so as you're doing discovery, just as it's just an example, but it's just adding a couple of layers. Yes. Look, you're not going to handle the whole case, but it's adding a few layers to the assignment is a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what you just said actually puts a very practical point on it, which is, and to the extent we've said this before here, because I don't think that the expectation is that someone would, without coming back to you, to see maybe a second issue that arises and just go down that rabbit trail for 4 hours writing something or researching it. It's more just like jot down the issue, bring it back. This raises this issue. Do you want to research that? Because it might be that it's a total waste of time and it's not applicable because of other things that they don't know yet. But it's having that, at least that thought, and writing it down and here are the 4 or 5 other things I think maybe we could either do, or new ideas or whatever. What do you think about these? It's not, at least I don't know. I know I'm not saying this, but we're not saying to go and take on another 40 hours worth of work that week on something that's just like a kind of harebrained idea. But we want to hear those ideas.
Yeah. No, I think it just shows, it shows ownership and interest in the case. And I think that's really the big thing. You're right. You can't just go spin out of control on an issue when the person who's supervising you says, Art, that's not an issue in this case, and I can't bill a client for that. But I do think just, wanting to have ownership in a way, it's more of a perception. I think it's more of I'm really interested in this. This is an interesting case. And, I was thinking about these other things. Is there something else, rather than just, again, in my example, hey, it's 4-year statute of limitations on a fraud claim. Here you go. Okay, thanks.
Right. Sure. When you're hiring an associate, what's maybe the 1 or 2 most important things that you're considering and looking at?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it really varies probably among law firms and those types of things. So in my firm, because we're so small, and candidly, we as my firm haven't hired anyone yet. So I'll draw a little bit on my prior experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You've done it.
Because that was a small firm.
Yeah.
I think for us, it was about having someone with enough experience that you're not starting from scratch.
Right.
But not so much experience that, it's sort of an old dog with new tricks. No, I don't know if that's a rough, way to explain it, but it's just, I think you were looking for, that middle ground. That could be someone that has 10 years experience. It could be someone that has 3 years experience. We hired all over the gamut. But I think you wanted, and again, I think we were always looking for someone who could kind of run with a case on their own, even if with supervision and with structure, but someone that would own the case, someone that could, communicate, that could get along well. Anytime you're hiring, especially in a small firm, and Rusty used to say this all the time, and it's right, it's very intuitive, but you're really also looking a lot at personality. I mean, small firms are very heavily impacted by personality. If you work in a 400-person firm and you get one-off person, it can absorb in there a little bit easier. But if you're in a 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15-person firm, one person who doesn't get along is a big deal. Yeah. So those things are just hard, I think, to figure out in an interview or on a resume. I just think they're hard, and it's a lot of it's just you sit and talk to people, you get to know them, try to decide, are they good conversationalists? Are they legitimately interested in my firm? Do they have good questions about my firm? What do you do? What does that mean? Those kinds of things. So, I think it's a little amorphous, but it's important to have. Obviously, look, you got to have somebody who's highly educated, who's smart, who's done well, who's go get them. But I think, on top of that, there's some intangibles about getting along, being able to interact with people. I know Rusty, and I draw back on that just because I worked there so long, but was big on people, that didn't have their everything given to them. I mean, that had to work. I mean, he really liked people from small towns because he felt like, by and large, they may be more down to earth. I'm not sure they are. I mean, there's plenty of people from big towns and cities that are great human beings. But, you're just always looking for something that you can kind of grab onto. So, I hope that helps.
No, it does. And I think you're right. It's an inexact science, if it's a science at all. And so it's tough. And especially, like you said, I agree. The smaller firm environment, the small firm has a little bit of a different job than a larger firm in trying to put together the pieces of the personality of the firm. And where you add one person to a 5-person firm, that is a significant percentage of the firm that just got added. And so it really does make a difference, the way that they fit in and all of that. What have I not asked that, if anything, that you would want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you've asked most things. I just would reiterate to people that don't be afraid to take chances. Nobody is born to be a lawyer. Nobody knows exactly what they want to do. You think you do, but be willing to, if you love it or you like where you are, great. If you don't, be willing to pivot and take chances. There's all kinds of lawyers. There's all kinds of situations that you can thrive in. And you can be successful. Even if you're not practicing law, there's lots of lawyers who do really well not practicing law. So, don't be worried to take a chance and go strike out at something different or new.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for that encouraging word to end on. Appreciate it. And we are at the end of our time. And so we've got some rapid fire questions if you're ready.
You bet. Have at it.
All right. Name the one trait or characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Initiative.
Awesome. What habit has been key to your success?
I think planning mixed with confidence. Since it's rapid fire, I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Your favorite app or productivity tool?
We use a program called Clio. That's a small firm program that's really worked well for us. I like it a lot. And then I still rely, I know this is less rapid fire, but I still rely on my calendar heavily. I just use an Outlook calendar. I put everything on it. I live and die by it. It's oldish school. It works great.
That's right. Absolutely. Your favorite social distancing activity?
I have loved having time, even more time to spend with my family. I've adored it. The kids have had to slow down. I've had to slow down.
Yeah.
And I've just adored spending time with them.
Awesome. That's cool. And last, your favorite legal movie?
I love A Time to Kill.
Yes.
Both the book and the movie.
Yep.
And if I want to laugh in a lawyer movie, it's always My Cousin Vinny.
Of course. Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking the time to be with us, and we wish you all the best with your firm. We're excited for you.
Yeah, well, I hope I can add some folks in the coming year, and that we're busy enough to do that. So thanks so much. I enjoyed being on the show, and it was a lot of fun. I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
All right. My thanks again to Derek Hollingsworth for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And then would you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? If you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, or I could help you in any way, please don't hesitate to email me, Daniel@varsitysearch.com. You can also go to varsitysearch.com/lawyers for information on current opportunities or just looking for ways to get in touch with us. All right. That's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.